The little black girl reported to the biker that a dock guard accused her before someone hid critical records. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. The sun had barely risen over the quiet port town of Riverton. A soft breeze carried the faint smell of salt water, mixing with the sounds of seagulls and distant truck engines. It was an ordinary morning for the dock workers, who were going about their business, unloading containers and preparing the boats for the day's activities. But for one little girl, everything was about to change. Aisha Coleman, barely 10 years old, with dark eyes wide with fear, raced toward the biker club's booth at the local carnival. She was barefoot, her small feet covered in dust and dirt from the run. Her dress was torn at the edges, and her braids were messy from the wind, but the panic in her eyes was unmistakable. She ran straight to a man wearing a leather jacket, his broad shoulders marking him as someone not to be messed with. "Please help. They took my brother," she cried, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. The man, a member of the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club, stood frozen for a moment, looking down at the frightened girl. He had seen his fair share of trouble, but this was different. This wasn't just another fight or a drunk causing trouble. Something was wrong, something deep. He kneeled down, bringing his face closer to hers. "Who took him, sweetheart? Where did they go?" Aisha pointed shakily toward the docks, her small finger trembling. "The dock guard. He grabbed Jamal, my brother. He said he was taking him for questioning, but they didn't let me follow. I think they're going to hurt him," she sobbed. The biker, Jake Hawk Morrison, felt a chill run down his spine. He knew the docks well, and he knew that guard. That man wasn't just any worker. He had a reputation. Hawk exchanged a brief glance with his club brothers. The Iron Riders were known for being tough, but they were also men of their word. And no one messed with family. "We're going after him," Hawk said firmly. The club members nodded, their expressions hardening. This was no longer just about a missing child. This was about protecting one of their own. Without wasting another moment, they kicked their bikes into gear, the roar of the engines cutting through the morning air like thunder. As they made their way to the docks, the sun rose higher, casting an orange glow over the water. The docks were now more than just a place of work. They had become a battleground. Hawk's mind raced. The dock guard had been known for being involved in shady activities, and with this new information, it was clear that Jamal was in serious danger. They couldn't waste any time. As the bikers approached the gates of the docks, they could see the silver SUV parked by the entrance, its engine still running. The guard was already inside, and the tension in the air was thick with danger. Hawk's fists clenched as they pulled up. He wasn't about to let anyone hurt an innocent kid. Not on his watch. The plan was simple. Find the guard, get Jamal, and make sure they stayed out of trouble. But things were never simple when you were dealing with people like this. The club split into teams, their movements coordinated and precise. As they approached the entrance, Hawk's phone buzzed. It was Aisha's mother, frantic. "He's been trying to cover up the truth. The guard hid some records, important records. I need you to find them before he does. The truth will set Jamal free," she said, her voice trembling with fear. Hawk didn't hesitate. "We're on it," he said. The race against time had just begun, and the Iron Riders were ready to face whatever came next. The engines of the Iron Riders roared to life as the crew rushed toward the docks. The tension in the air was palpable, the sound of their bikes echoing through the streets of Riverton. Jake Hawk Morrison, riding at the front, had a grim look on his face. They were heading straight into a dangerous situation, but he couldn't back down now. Not after hearing that terrified little girl cry for help. As they neared the gates, Hawk saw the silver SUV still parked by the entrance. His gut twisted as he noticed a couple of unfamiliar men standing near it, looking like trouble. Without hesitation, Hawk and his crew split up. Bear, the massive member of the club, and Diesel, the tech-savvy one, headed towards the front gate, while Hawk, Shadow, and Colossus took a different route, sneaking through the side entrance. The docks were quiet now, with the usual sounds of industry muted under the rising tension. Hawk moved silently, his leather boots barely making a sound on the cracked pavement. They had no idea where Jamal was being held, but Hawk had a feeling it wouldn't be easy to find him. As they moved further into the complex, Hawk's phone buzzed in his pocket. He quickly pulled it out and saw a message from Aisha's mother. "I just remembered something. There's a locked file at the guard's office. It contains information about the incident, about the people involved. It's crucial. Find it before it's erased." Hawk cursed under his breath. They weren't just up against a rogue dock guard now. This was bigger than that. He signaled to his crew, his voice low. "We need to find that file. We can't let him cover this up." They continued moving deeper into the maze of warehouses and loading docks. As they passed a row of shipping containers, Hawk motioned for the team to stop. He could hear voices up ahead. They ducked behind a large container, peeking around the corner. A couple of dock workers were talking to the guard from earlier, the one who had been accused of taking Jamal. Hawk's pulse quickened. This was it. They had to move fast. "Stay low. Keep quiet," he whispered. The group moved like shadows, sticking to the edges of the warehouse, careful not to draw attention. As they approached the guard's office, Hawk noticed the door was slightly ajar. Inside, he could see the figure of the dock guard, rifling through papers on a desk. The man was trying to destroy something important. Hawk exchanged a quick glance with Shadow, and without a word, they made their move. They burst into the room, and the guard froze, his eyes widening in shock. "What the hell are you doing here?" he spat, his hand reaching for something under the desk. Hawk was quicker. In a single motion, he grabbed the guard by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his voice a low growl. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me where Jamal is." The guard's face twisted with fear, but he refused to speak. Hawk tightened his grip, his patience running thin. "You better talk, or I'll make you." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was dead silent. Just as Hawk was about to press harder, Diesel's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Hawk, I found the file. It's in a safe in the back room." Hawk gave a quick nod. "Let's move. The kid's not here, but we need to find out what they're hiding." They moved quickly, with Hawk leading the way. Diesel had already cracked the safe, and as the door opened, Hawk could see a pile of papers, documents detailing the guard's connections, illegal activities, and what looked like a cover-up of some serious wrongdoings. This wasn't just about a missing child. This was bigger, far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "This isn't over," Hawk muttered to himself, a sense of resolve settling over him. They had what they needed. The rest was up to them. The group quickly exited the office, the documents in hand. As they made their way back to their bikes, Hawk's mind raced. They had a plan now, but they needed to act fast. There was no telling what the dock guard would do next, and Hawk wasn't about to let him get away with hiding the truth. "We've got what we need. Let's go," he said to his crew, his voice steady but urgent. As they mounted their bikes and revved their engines, Hawk looked back toward the docks, knowing the fight was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. The sound of roaring engines echoed through the streets of Riverton as the Iron Riders sped away from the docks. Hawk kept his focus ahead, the documents clutched tightly in his hand. His mind raced with thoughts of Jamal, and what the cover-up they had just uncovered meant. The truth was darker than he had imagined, and now they had to act fast before things spiraled further out of control. As they made their way back to the clubhouse, Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the guard that was involved in this. There were deeper connections, darker forces pulling the strings. He needed to get to the bottom of it. The group's bikes rumbled in unison as they turned into the clubhouse parking lot. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky a dusky purple. It was late, but they weren't stopping. Hawk's crew dismounted quickly, the urgency in their movements palpable. Forge, the leader of the Iron Riders, was already waiting for them at the entrance, his arms crossed and a grim look on his face. "What did you find?" Forge asked, his voice low but demanding. Hawk handed over the file, and Forge wasted no time in flipping it open. His eyes scanned the documents, narrowing with every line. "This is bad," Forge muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "I knew that dock guard was trouble, but this," Hawk nodded. "It's bigger than we thought. He's got connections to some powerful people. This isn't just about Jamal anymore. We're dealing with a cover-up, and someone's trying to hide the truth." The room fell silent as the rest of the crew gathered around, their faces hardening with each passing moment. "What's the plan?" Diesel asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. Hawk took a deep breath. We need to move quickly. We've got the proof, but we're still missing the final piece of the puzzle. We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to do it before the guard gets wind of what we're doing. Bear, the club's biggest and most intimidating member, stepped forward. We'll handle it. Whatever it takes. Hawk looked at his crew, the people who had become his second family over the years. They had all been through hell together, and this fight was no different. They weren't going to back down now. All right, Hawk said, his voice firm. We go after the guard. We hit him hard, but we do it smart. We don't let anyone get in our way. The crew nodded in agreement. They were ready. It didn't matter who they had to go through to get to the truth. They would fight until the end. As they geared up, Hawk pulled out his phone and dialed Aisha's number. Aisha, we've got what we need. But we still have a long road ahead. Stay safe, and don't let anyone near Jamal until we get there. Aisha's voice came through, trembling with fear, but filled with relief. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Just hurry. Hawk's heart tightened at her words. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. He couldn't let anyone hurt that kid. Not when he promised his friend, Tyrone, that he'd protect his family. We're on it, Hawk said, hanging up the phone. The Iron Riders mounted their bikes once again, and this time, they weren't just riding for a cause. They were riding for justice. They roared out of the parking lot, the night air rushing past them. The moon hung high above, casting a cold light over the city. As they sped down the highway, the rumble of their engines felt like a promise to the people of Rivorton. They weren't just a club, they were a force to be reckoned with. The road ahead was dark, but Hawk could see the faintest hint of light on the horizon. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous things would become. But Hawk was ready. He had to be. For Jamal. For Aisha. For the promise he made. As they approached the old warehouse where the dock guard had been known to meet his associates, Hawk signaled for the crew to slow down. He could hear voices up ahead, and he needed to plan their next move. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Hawk motioned for Diesel to pull up next to him. What's the word on the street? He asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the engines. Diesel adjusted the helmet on his head and spoke through the comms. The guard's been moving fast. He's already got a lawyer on standby, and they're trying to clean up their mess. We need to move now before they cover their tracks. Hawk nodded grimly. This was it. They were getting closer to the truth, and it was time to make their move. With a final nod to his crew, Hawk signaled for them to head toward the warehouse. As they approached the building, Hawk's heart rate quickened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The final confrontation was about to begin. The warehouse loomed ahead, its large metal doors barely lit by the pale glow of the moon. Hawk's heart was pounding in his chest as they approached. His mind raced with the thought of what they might find inside, and the deeper he thought about it, the more the weight of their mission settled on his shoulders. Jamal was still out there, and whatever they uncovered inside this building could mean the difference between life and death for him. Hawk signaled to the crew to stop just outside the warehouse. The Iron Riders pulled in tight, parking their bikes in the shadows, their engines fading into silence. Hawk's eyes scanned the building, looking for any signs of movement. He didn't trust this place. It was too quiet, too controlled. He motioned for Bear, Diesel, and Shadow to follow him. The rest of the crew would hold back in case things got messy. As they crept forward, Hawk's instincts told him they weren't alone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he reached for the gun strapped to his side. They were prepared for anything. The dock guard was likely inside, but they had no idea who else might be involved. They moved in silence, their footsteps light but deliberate. When they reached the door, Bear pulled out a crowbar and pried it open, the old hinges creaking in protest. Hawk gestured for everyone to stay close as they entered. The dimly lit interior of the warehouse was filled with the smell of stale air and old machinery. Shadows danced on the walls as they moved deeper into the space. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Footsteps. Hawk's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. Stay low, Hawk whispered. The crew nodded, crouching as they advanced, their eyes scanning every corner. They passed rows of old crates and equipment, the tension thick in the air. The footsteps grew louder, and Hawk's pulse quickened. They were getting closer. Hawk motioned for Diesel to take the lead. Diesel, with his calm demeanor and sharp instincts, moved forward cautiously. As they neared a large stack of crates, they saw him. The dock guard. He was standing by a desk, talking to someone on the phone, his back turned. Hawk took a deep breath. This was their chance. He nodded to Bear, and the two of them moved in, closing the distance between them and the guard. Bear was the first to strike, his massive hand gripping the guard's shoulder and spinning him around. The guard's eyes widened in shock. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled, trying to pull away. Hawk stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've got a lot to answer for, my friend. Where's Jamal?" The dock guard sneered, his face twisting in contempt. "You're wasting your time. The kid's gone, and there's nothing you can do about it." Hawk's jaw tightened. He wasn't leaving without answers. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, his voice low. The dock guard laughed, but there was fear in his eyes now. "You really think you can take me down, biker? You have no idea what you're up against." Just then, the sound of a door opening behind them caught Hawk's attention. He turned just in time to see two men step into the room, both armed and ready for a fight. They were clearly part of something bigger, and Hawk knew they needed to move fast. Without warning, he lunged at the dock guard, knocking him to the ground. Bear and Diesel immediately took positions, ready to fend off the newcomers. The men with guns stepped forward, but Hawk wasn't intimidated. "You're not getting away with this," he growled, reaching for his own weapon. The first man fired, but Hawk was quicker, ducking behind a stack of crates. The bullets ricocheted off the metal, and the fight was on. Shadow and the rest of the crew rushed in, adding to the chaos. The warehouse was now a battleground. Shots rang out as the Iron Riders fought to take control of the situation. Hawk's heart was racing as he moved toward the desk, his eyes scanning for any sign of Jamal. He couldn't afford to lose focus. Time was running out. The dock guard, now on the ground, was still struggling to get up. "Where is he?" Hawk demanded. The guard groaned, but didn't answer. Hawk kicked the chair next to him, sending it flying across the room. "Where is Jamal?" The guard's eyes darted to the back of the room, and that was all the confirmation Hawk needed. He pointed to Diesel. "Get to the back. Find him. Now." Diesel nodded and rushed off. Hawk stayed behind, keeping his weapon trained on the guard. As Diesel moved through the warehouse, he found a hidden door in the back. It was locked, but with a swift kick, he broke it open. Inside, he found what he feared most. Jamal. The boy was shackled to a chair, his face bruised but alive. Diesel quickly ran over, checking for injuries before unlocking the chains. "You're okay now, kid," Diesel said, lifting Jamal into his arms. The boy was barely conscious, but he nodded weakly. Diesel carried him back to Hawk, who was waiting near the front. The dock guard, now bound and gagged, was still cursing under his breath. Hawk looked at Diesel, relief flooding his chest. "Let's get him out of here," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. The Iron Riders gathered around, ready to leave the warehouse and head back to safety. But Hawk knew this wasn't over. The fight was just beginning, and they had to stay one step ahead of whoever was behind this. The road ahead would be long, but with Jamal safe in their hands, they had one less thing to worry about. Now, they had to make sure the rest of the story came to light. The sound of their bikes echoed through the dark streets of Riverton as Hawk and the Iron Riders made their way back to the clubhouse, Jamal safely secured between them. The tension from the warehouse was still heavy in the air, but now there was a flicker of hope. Jamal was alive, and they had the proof they needed to expose the corruption that had been festering in the docks. But Hawk knew this wasn't over. The guard's last words kept echoing in his mind. "You're not the only ones looking for the truth." The Iron Riders roared through the streets, heading toward the clubhouse, their engines thundering in unison. Hawk could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. They had to act quickly. Time was running out. When they arrived at the clubhouse, the crew dismounted, their faces grim but resolute. Diesel, who had carried Jamal, gently set him down on one of the chairs in the clubhouse's main room. The boy was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady, and that was all Hawk needed to know. He motioned for the others to gather around. "We've got what we need," Hawk said, his voice firm but tired. "But we're not done yet. We need to make sure we get everything out before they cover their tracks. This isn't just about Jamal anymore. We've got an entire system of corruption to take down." The crew nodded, their eyes filled with determination. "What's the plan?" Forge asked, stepping forward. Hawk looked around at his crew, his brothers and sisters, and knew they were ready. "We need to get to the docks. There's still more we don't know, and we can't let them get away with it. Diesel, you're going to get those files we found. We need to make sure they're locked down, but we can't do it alone. We're going to need help. Diesel nodded. I'll handle it. Just give me the signal. Good, Hawk said, his gaze moving over the group. The rest of you, we need to make sure the dock guard doesn't disappear. We'll get him to talk, but we need to move fast. Shadow, you and Colossus will cover the exits. Bear, I want you on lookout. We're going in hard and fast. The crew split into teams, each member knowing their role. Hawk's heart was racing, but he couldn't afford to lose focus. They were on the edge of something bigger than they had imagined. As they prepared to leave, Hawk's phone buzzed. It was a message from Aisha. Thank you. He's awake. He keeps asking for you. Please hurry. Hawk felt a weight lift from his chest. Jamal was awake. The boy had survived everything thrown at him, and now it was their turn to finish what they had started. We're going to make sure he's safe, Hawk muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Let's move out. The Iron Riders revved their bikes, the engines growling in the night as they made their way toward the docks. The streets were empty, the city still and quiet, but Hawk could feel the storm brewing. They had come too far to turn back now. As they approached the dockyard, the lights were dim, casting long shadows over the massive warehouses. Hawk's eyes narrowed. They weren't alone. He could see movement in the distance, two men standing near a loading dock, talking quietly. Hawk signaled for the crew to halt, their bikes coming to a stop in the shadows. They're still here, Hawk said under his breath. We need to be quick. No mistakes. Diesel, who had been riding with Hawk, adjusted his helmet. We get in, we get out. No unnecessary risks. The crew moved forward, creeping through the dark alleys of the dockyard, their boots light against the pavement. The sound of distant machinery and the crashing of waves against the docks filled the air, but it only added to the tension. Hawk's eyes flicked to the two men by the loading dock. One of them was the dock guard, the same man who had been trying to cover up everything. They were close. They needed to move now. Shadow, Colossus, take the back entrance, Hawk ordered, his voice calm but commanding. Bear, stay here with Diesel. We'll go in from the front. As the crew split up, Hawk's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment of truth. They reached the entrance of the warehouse, the large metal doors slightly ajar. Hawk pushed them open, the creak of the hinges cutting through the silence like a knife. Inside, the dock guard and his accomplice were standing over a desk, arguing. Hawk stepped inside, his presence immediately drawing their attention. We need to talk, Hawk said, his voice low and steady. The two men froze, their eyes widening as they saw the biker crew stepping into the room, guns at the ready. You've been hiding something, and we're not leaving until we find out what it is, Hawk continued, his eyes cold with determination. The dock guard stepped back, raising his hands. You don't understand, he said, his voice shaky. You can't just— Shut up, Hawk interrupted. We're done listening to your lies. You've been covering up the truth for too long. Now, you're going to pay for it. As the guard's accomplice made a move to pull out a weapon, Diesel stepped forward, his gun raised. Not today, Diesel said, his voice sharp. The room fell into silence, the weight of the situation settling over everyone. Hawk's eyes never left the guard. Where is the rest of the evidence? He asked, his voice unwavering. The dock guard swallowed hard. It's hidden. Behind the back wall. The file, everything, it's there. Hawk nodded to Diesel, who moved to the back of the room. As Diesel began searching for the hidden file, Hawk kept his eyes on the two men, ensuring they didn't make any sudden moves. This is over, Hawk said quietly. And you're going to tell us everything. The door to the back room slammed open as Diesel found the hidden compartment. Inside were more documents. More records, everything they needed to bring down the corruption. Hawk stepped forward, taking the evidence in his hands. It was over. They had what they needed to expose everything. But Hawk knew this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and the Iron Riders would stop at nothing to see it through. The sound of their bikes echoed through the narrow streets as the Iron Riders made their way back to the clubhouse. Hawk's heart was still racing, the adrenaline of the mission pulsing through his veins. They had the evidence they needed, the proof that would bring down the corrupt system that had been preying on the people of Riverton. But Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched, that someone was always one step ahead. As they pulled into the parking lot, Hawk looked around, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. The crew dismounted, their faces hard and focused, the weight of their mission hanging in the air. Diesel was already inside the clubhouse, laying out the documents they had found. The evidence was damning. It was more than just the dock guard. It was a network of corrupt officials, shady business deals, and people in power who had been exploiting their positions for years. Hawk walked over to the table, his eyes fixed on the pile of files in front of him. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still one big question left unanswered. Who was pulling the strings? "We've got the evidence," Hawk said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "But we still don't know who's behind all this. We need to get to the top." Forge, the leader of the Iron Riders, stepped forward, his expression serious. "We'll go after them," he said. "We'll take them down, one by one." Hawk nodded. "But we need to do this right. We can't just go in guns blazing. We need to expose them for what they really are." Diesel nodded in agreement. "I'll start digging into the paperwork," he said. "We might find something in these records that leads us to the big players." As Diesel started going through the files, Hawk turned to Bear and Shadow. "We need to make sure the guard doesn't run. Get some muscle out there. We'll hold down the fort here while Diesel works his magic." Bear and Shadow both nodded, already heading toward the door to put their plan into action. Hawk turned back to the table, his mind racing through all the information they had gathered. They were close. So close. But there was something nagging at him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about bringing down a few bad apples. This was about cleaning up an entire system. As Diesel sifted through the papers, Hawk's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Aisha's name on the screen. He quickly answered. "Aisha, what's going on?" Her voice was frantic, the words coming out in a rush. "Hawk, they're coming for us. The dock guard, he's gone. And someone's trying to cover up everything. I don't know who to trust anymore. I'm scared." Hawk's blood ran cold. He knew they were in danger, but hearing it from Aisha made it all too real. "Listen to me, Aisha," Hawk said, his voice low and reassuring. "We're going to protect you. Stay where you are. We're coming to you now." Aisha's voice shook. "Please, Hawk, hurry." Hawk's grip tightened around the phone. "We'll be there in 5 minutes. Stay safe." He hung up, his mind already racing with the possibilities. "We've got to move. They're coming after Aisha," Hawk said, his voice sharp. "We can't let them get to her first." The crew sprang into action, their movements swift and coordinated. Diesel grabbed the files and slipped them into a bag, while Forge and the others prepared to ride out. Hawk's mind was a whirlwind of plans and contingencies. They couldn't afford to fail now, not when they were so close to taking down the people behind all of this. As they mounted their bikes and revved their engines, Hawk looked over at the rest of the crew. "Stick together. We ride hard, we ride fast. And we don't stop until Aisha is safe." The Iron Riders roared into the night, their bikes thundering down the road. The wind whipped past them as they made their way to Aisha's location, but Hawk's thoughts were already on what came next. They had the evidence. They had the truth. Now, it was time to bring it all to light. The road ahead was dangerous, but Hawk had never backed down from a fight. And this fight was far from over. They reached Aisha's apartment building within minutes, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. Hawk signaled for the crew to slow down as they pulled into the parking lot, their bikes coming to a halt. Hawk motioned for Bear and Shadow to take the back entrance while he, Forge, and Diesel headed for the front. As they approached the building, Hawk could see Aisha standing near the window, her face pale with fear. She looked up and saw them, relief flooding her features. Hawk rushed up the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. "Aisha," he called out as he reached the door. Aisha opened it, her eyes wide with panic. "Hawk, they're here. They're coming for me. They know we have the files." Hawk's heart sank. "We're not leaving without you," he said firmly, stepping inside. "Get your things. We're taking you somewhere safe." As Aisha quickly packed a bag, Hawk's mind raced. The fight wasn't over, but for now, he had one mission: get her out safely. They couldn't let the people behind this corruption get to her. Not now. Not ever. As they made their way to the bikes, Hawk felt the weight of the situation settle over him. They were far from done, but they had made it this far together. The Iron Riders wouldn't stop until justice was served. The engines of the Iron Riders hummed through the night as they sped down the highway, their destination clear but the tension in the air thick. Hawk had Aisha with him, her face pale from fear but filled with relief. The crew had moved fast, and their mission to keep her safe was underway. The whole time, Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. They had the evidence, they had Jamal, and they had the truth. But the people behind this were powerful, and they weren't going to give up easily. As they rode, Hawk kept his eyes on the road ahead, the moonlight casting long shadows over the asphalt. Diesel was right behind him, his bike roaring, while Bear and Shadow kept watch from the rear, scanning for any signs of pursuit. Hawk's mind was on the task ahead, getting Aisha and Jamal somewhere safe, and exposing the corruption that had been festering in Riverton for far too long. But he knew the battle was far from over. As they neared the safe house, a small, nondescript building tucked away on the outskirts of town, Hawk's heart began to race. This was their last stop before they went public with everything. The truth was ready to be revealed, but so was the danger. Hawk signaled to Diesel to slow down as they approached the entrance, the crew falling in behind him. Aisha was still with them, clutching her bag, her eyes darting nervously around. Hawk's eyes never left the road, but he could feel her anxiety. "We're almost there," Hawk muttered under his breath, more to reassure himself than anyone else. As they pulled into the driveway, Hawk's eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for anything out of place. The house was quiet, too quiet. There were no signs of life, no movement from the windows, and yet Hawk felt a chill run down his spine. Something was off. Diesel pulled up beside him, cutting the engine with a smooth motion. "Everything looks clear," he said, his voice steady. Hawk nodded but didn't say anything. He could feel the tension in the air, the kind that made every sound seem amplified, every shadow seem menacing. "Let's move quickly," Hawk said, his voice low but firm. "Get Aisha and Jamal inside. We don't know how much time we have before they catch up with us." Bear and Shadow stepped off their bikes first, scanning the area. Aisha followed closely behind, her hand gripping Hawk's arm as they moved towards the door. As they entered the house, the smell of stale air and dust filled their nostrils. The place was sparsely furnished, with just enough space for the crew to regroup and lay low. "We'll keep watch," Bear said, his voice rough but reassuring. "You get the evidence out, Diesel. It's time to put this all on the line." Diesel nodded, moving toward the back room where they'd hidden the files. The tension in the air grew heavier as they waited. Hawk paced the floor, his mind racing through all the possible outcomes. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Not now. Not after everything they had gone through. As Diesel pulled out the files, his hands shaking slightly, Hawk felt a sense of relief wash over him. The truth was finally within reach. But, just as Diesel began to organize the papers, the sound of a distant engine caught Hawk's attention. His head snapped up, and he looked out the window. In the distance, he could see headlights approaching. The crew froze, and Hawk's heart skipped a beat. They were coming. "Get ready," Hawk hissed, his voice low. "They're here." The sound of the approaching vehicle grew louder, and Hawk could feel the adrenaline surge through his veins. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. "We need to move. Now," Hawk said, his voice sharp with urgency. Bear and Shadow were already at the door, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Hawk turned to Diesel, who had just finished gathering the files. "We've got to get these to the press," Hawk said, his voice tight with determination. "We can't let them cover this up. Not after everything we've been through." Diesel nodded, holding the files close to his chest. "We'll get them out there. But we need to be quick. They're not going to make this easy." The engines of the approaching vehicles roared louder, and Hawk could see the headlights getting closer. They didn't have much time. "Get Aisha and Jamal out the back," Hawk ordered. "I'll hold them off." Bear and Shadow nodded, ready to act. They moved quickly, ushering Aisha and Jamal towards the back door, while Hawk and Diesel prepared for the confrontation. The sound of the engine grew louder still, and Hawk's pulse quickened. He stepped toward the front of the house, his hand on his gun, his mind focused. As the vehicle neared, Hawk's instincts kicked in. He wasn't about to let anyone get to Aisha or Jamal. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. The car pulled up in front of the house, and Hawk could see the figures of two men stepping out. They were armed, their faces obscured by the darkness. Hawk didn't hesitate. He stepped into the open, his voice cutting through the night. "Stay back," he shouted, his gun trained on the two men. The men froze, their eyes narrowing as they saw Hawk standing there, ready to fight. "You're not getting past me," Hawk said, his voice firm. The two men exchanged a glance, then one of them raised his weapon. Hawk's heart pounded as the standoff began. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The tension in the air was thick as Hawk stood facing the two men, their weapons raised, eyes filled with anger and determination. The sound of the engines from their car reverberated through the still night air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Hawk's pulse was steady, but his mind raced. He couldn't afford to make a single mistake now. Not with Aisha and Jamal inside. Not with the evidence they had just uncovered. He needed to hold his ground. Stay back, Hawk repeated, his voice calm but firm, his hand on the grip of his gun, ready for anything. The two men exchanged another glance, sizing him up. One of them, taller and broader, took a step forward, his hand twitching toward his own weapon. Hawk didn't flinch. You think you're stopping us? The taller man sneered. This is bigger than you. Get out of the way, or things will get ugly. Hawk's gaze didn't waver. I don't think so. You're not touching anyone in this house. The standoff seemed to stretch on forever, the only sounds the rustling of the wind and the soft hum of the streetlights in the distance. Then, in a flash, the taller man lunged forward, his gun aimed directly at Hawk. Hawk was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew his weapon and fired. The sound of the shot rang out, sharp and clear, and the man dropped to the ground, his weapon clattering on the pavement. The other man froze, his eyes wide with shock. You're next, Hawk said, his voice cold. The second man hesitated, but Hawk didn't wait for him to make a move. With a quick step forward, Hawk grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the side of the car. Where's the rest of your crew? Hawk demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man gasped, struggling to free himself, but Hawk held him firm. You're not leaving here until you tell me everything. The man's face twisted with rage, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. You don't understand, he spat. You're playing with fire. This isn't just about some dock guard. This goes much higher. Hawk pressed harder, his grip tightening. I don't care how high this goes. I'm not leaving until you tell me everything. The man's eyes darted toward the downed body of his partner. With a grunt, he gave in. You're right. This is bigger than just us. But you won't get the full story. Not from me. Not unless you want to die trying. Hawk knew he wasn't getting any more answers from him. He stepped back, ready to end this fight once and for all. But just as he raised his gun to fire, a sound from behind made him freeze. A voice, familiar yet unexpected, called out from the shadows. Hold your fire. Hawk turned to see Diesel stepping out of the darkness, his gun holstered but his posture tense. What the hell, Diesel? Hawk snapped. We need to finish this. Diesel raised a hand, motioning for Hawk to calm down. It's not over yet, Diesel said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We've got a bigger problem. Hawk's heart sank. What do you mean? Diesel looked over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. They know we're here. The rest of their crew's on the way. And they've got reinforcements. We need to move. Now. Hawk cursed under his breath. Get Aisha and Jamal out of here. Take them to the backup location. I'll deal with this. Diesel nodded, turning to lead Aisha and Jamal toward the back of the house. Stay safe, Hawk said, his voice low, his gaze meeting Diesel's. I'll cover you. As Diesel and the others disappeared into the night, Hawk turned back to the men in front of him. He wasn't about to let them escape, not when they had the chance to take down the entire operation. The remaining man, still pinned against the car, was breathing heavily. You think you're going to stop all of us? He sneered. Hawk's gaze was cold as he moved closer, his gun aimed steadily at the man. I'm not stopping until I know who's pulling the strings. And you're going to help me do that. The man's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. Hawk pressed the barrel of his gun against his chest. Where's the rest of the information? Where's the money? Who's behind the corruption? The man laughed weakly. You're wasting your time. You think a few bikers are going to take down a whole organization? They're too big. You'll never make it out of here alive. Hawk's finger tightened on the trigger. I'll make sure you never get the chance to hurt anyone again. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, the sound of tires screeching reached his ears. A car, several cars, were speeding down the street, and Hawk knew they were coming straight for him. He turned to make a quick decision. The man in front of him was useless now. Hawk couldn't afford to waste time. He bolted for the back of the house, his boots pounding the pavement as he sprinted toward the others. Diesel and the crew were already moving, their bikes ready, engines roaring to life. Hawk could see Aisha and Jamal already seated, ready to go. Without a second thought, Hawk jumped onto his bike and slammed the throttle down, his mind focused entirely on getting them out of there. The Iron Riders shot out of the driveway, the sound of their bikes filling the night air as they sped towards safety. But Hawk knew the danger wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from finished, and they were going to make sure the people behind this would never get away with it. The roar of the Iron Riders' engines cut through the night air as they sped down the dark highway, leaving the chaos behind them. Hawk kept his focus ahead, his thoughts racing with everything that had happened and everything still to come. The backup location wasn't far, but Hawk knew that it was only a temporary safe haven. The truth was out there now, and the people who had been pulling the strings weren't going to let this go without a fight. As they rode, Hawk kept glancing back at Aisha and Jamal, both of whom were seated behind Diesel on his bike. The boy, still weak, clung to Diesel with one hand, his other arm wrapped protectively around his sister. Hawk's heart ached at the sight. Jamal had been through so much already, and the last thing he wanted was to drag the boy further into this war. But it was too late for that. The fight had already begun. The Iron Riders made their way to the backup location, a small cabin hidden deep in the woods, miles away from any major roads. It was secure, isolated, and, most importantly, hard to find. They pulled up to the cabin, their bikes cutting the silence of the woods. Hawk signaled for the crew to park, and they dismounted quickly. Diesel took Aisha and Jamal inside, while Hawk and the others stayed alert, scanning the area for any sign of danger. The weight of their mission settled heavily on Hawk's shoulders as he stood at the door, his mind racing. They had the evidence now, the documents they had recovered, the proof of corruption, but that was just the beginning. They needed to expose everything. Hawk had promised to keep Aisha and Jamal safe, but he also knew that this fight wasn't just about them. It was about the people of Riverton, about bringing down the system that had been exploiting them for so long. As the crew gathered in the small cabin, Hawk took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Diesel placed the files on the table, and they all gathered around, the weight of what they had to do ahead of them clear in their faces. "We can't go public just yet," Hawk said, his voice low but firm. "We need to make sure we're ready. The last thing we want is for them to cover this up again." Forge, ever the strategist, nodded. "We'll need a plan. We can't do this alone. We need to reach out to people who can help." Diesel's voice was steady. "I know people. We can get this to the right channels, but we need to be sure we're not leading them right to us." Hawk's eyes flicked to the window, his gaze narrowing as a shadow passed outside. His instincts kicked in. "We're not alone," he muttered. Forge, who had been listening intently, stood up, his hand on the grip of his gun. "I'll check it out," he said, moving quietly to the door. Hawk followed him, his senses heightened. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit Hawk's face, and he immediately scanned the perimeter of the cabin. The woods were dark, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But there was something off, something that didn't feel right. Suddenly, a figure appeared from the darkness, emerging from the tree line. Hawk's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly raised his gun, ready for whatever was coming. "Hold your fire," Forge said, his voice calm but cautious. The figure stepped forward, hands raised in surrender. "We're not here to fight," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "We're here to help." Hawk lowered his weapon slightly, but kept it trained on the man. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. The man's face was shadowed, but Hawk could see the weariness in his eyes. "Name's Ray," the man said. "I used to work at the docks. I'm one of the good ones. I heard about what's going on, and I want to help." Hawk's eyes narrowed. "You're a dock worker? You're part of this mess." Ray shook his head. "No. I was trying to expose it all before they shut me down. I got out before they could take me with them. But they're getting desperate now. They're coming for you." Hawk's grip on his gun tightened. "You're not the only one they're coming for," he said, his voice cold. "They're after anyone who knows what's really going on." Ray nodded. "That's why I'm here. I've got information. They've been moving fast, but I've got a lead on their next move." Hawk's mind raced. "You've got a lead?" Ray nodded, pulling out a small folder from under his jacket. "I've been keeping track. They've got a meeting set up in the morning. Big players, the ones pulling all the strings. If you're going to take them down, this is your chance." Hawk exchanged a look with Forge. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. They had the chance to take down the whole network. "We're going in," Hawk said, his voice firm with resolve. "But we need everyone ready. No mistakes. No chances." The crew gathered around, ready to take action. Ray's information could be the key to ending this once and for all. But Hawk knew it wouldn't be easy. The fight was far from over. As they made their preparations, Hawk couldn't help but feel the weight of everything on his shoulders. He had promised Aisha and Jamal he would keep them safe, and now the moment of truth had arrived. They had come this far, and they weren't stopping now. They would expose the truth, take down the corrupt system, and make sure those responsible paid for what they had done. It was time to finish what they had started. The morning light was still a faint glow in the distance as Hawk and the Iron Riders geared up for the final showdown. They had the lead, the evidence, and a plan, but Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The weight of everything they had fought for hung heavy on his shoulders. As the crew prepared, Hawk stood by his bike, checking his gear one last time. The plan was simple, or at least as simple as it could be. They would hit the meeting, expose the people behind the operation, and make sure they couldn't escape. But Hawk knew it wouldn't be that easy. They had come this far, and now it was time to finish it. Ray had been their inside man, providing them with the final pieces of the puzzle. He had come through, and now it was up to them to make sure it all came to light. The Iron Riders gathered around, each of them fully equipped and ready for the fight ahead. Diesel, Bear, Shadow, and Colossus were all set to execute their parts of the plan. Hawk's eyes locked on each of them, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew what was at stake. "We move out in 5 minutes, Hawk said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "Everyone stick to the plan. No heroics. We're getting in, getting the truth, and getting out. Fast." The crew nodded, their faces set with grim resolve. Hawk could feel the tension building, the anticipation of what was to come. The meeting was taking place in an old industrial park just outside of town. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting, isolated, with plenty of places to hide. Hawk's mind raced as he thought about the faces he might see today. The people who had been hiding in the shadows, pulling the strings, had no idea what was coming. But Hawk wasn't about to let them get away with it. He had promised to protect Aisha and Jamal, and he wasn't about to let anyone take them from him. As they approached the industrial park, the group slowed down, their bikes now moving in a tight formation. Hawk's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the area, looking for any signs of movement. The place was quiet, too quiet. The heavy machinery that once filled the park with noise was still. The doors to the warehouse at the far end of the lot were closed, but Hawk knew they were waiting inside. "This is it," Hawk said, his voice steady. "Shadow, Bear, you're with me. We're going through the front. Diesel, Colossus, you take the back. Everyone stay low. No one moves until we're inside." The crew took their positions, moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Hawk's adrenaline surged as they approached the warehouse. Every step felt like it could be their last. As they reached the door, Hawk paused, listening for any sounds from inside. Nothing. The silence was deafening. He turned to Bear and Shadow, giving them a nod. The three of them pushed the door open quietly, slipping inside the darkened warehouse. The musty air hit them first, followed by the faint smell of gasoline and oil. Hawk's eyes adjusted to the darkness, scanning the room. There, at the far end, were several figures gathered around a table. Hawk's pulse quickened. They were here, the men behind all of this. But it wasn't just them. Hawk could see the outlines of others, standing off to the side, waiting. He didn't recognize their faces, but he could tell they were just as dangerous. Hawk signaled to the others, and they moved quickly, surrounding the room. The tension was thick, but Hawk wasn't going to let it rattle him. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is over," Hawk said, his tone firm. "We have the evidence. We know what you've been doing, and we're not leaving until you're all exposed." The men at the table froze, their eyes darting toward Hawk and his crew. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, stood up slowly, his hand moving toward his side. Hawk didn't hesitate. "Don't make a move," he warned. The man's hand froze mid-reach. "You think you can take us all down with your little biker gang?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Hawk stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the man. "We don't need to take you all down. We just need to take you down," he said coldly. Without warning, the doors to the back of the warehouse burst open, and more men rushed in, guns drawn. Hawk's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He was ready. "Everyone stay calm," he shouted. "We've got them surrounded. We're getting the truth, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." The new arrivals hesitated, looking around at the Iron Riders, who were now spread out across the room, weapons drawn and ready. The tall man at the table let out a low laugh. You think you're winning? You're just starting a war. Hawk's gaze hardened. I didn't start this war, but I'll finish it. With a sudden movement, the man lunged for his gun, but Hawk was faster. He fired a single shot, the sound of the gun echoing in the warehouse. The man dropped to the ground, his gun falling from his hand. The room erupted into chaos as the remaining men tried to make a move, but the Iron Riders were quicker, taking them down one by one. Hawk's pulse raced as the fight raged on. But even as the last of the opposition fell, Hawk knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The truth had been exposed, but the real battle was just starting. They had to make sure they got out alive and brought down everyone involved. As the smoke cleared and the Iron Riders stood victorious, Hawk looked around at his crew. We're not done yet, he said, his voice calm but filled with a new sense of determination. We've taken the first step, but we still have to finish what we started. The dust settled in the warehouse, the sounds of struggle slowly fading as the Iron Riders stood victorious. The air was thick with the aftermath of the battle, but Hawk's mind was already racing ahead. They had taken down the men in the warehouse, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. The higher-ups, the ones truly responsible for the corruption, were still out there. Hawk glanced over at Diesel, who was securing the evidence they had gathered. The files they had retrieved contained everything needed to bring down the entire criminal network. But Hawk knew it wasn't going to be as easy as handing the evidence over to the authorities. There were powerful people involved, and they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. As the crew gathered their gear, Hawk felt a sense of urgency. They couldn't afford to waste any time. Aisha and Jamal were safe for now, but they couldn't stay here forever. The longer they stayed, the greater the risk. Hawk turned to Forge, who was checking the perimeter, his expression grim. What's the plan? Forge asked, his voice low but steady. Hawk's eyes narrowed. We get this evidence to the right people, but we don't trust anyone until we're sure. We've seen what they're capable of. Diesel walked over, holding a small flash drive in his hand. I've secured the files. We need to get this to the press, but we also need to lay low. They're going to be looking for us. Hawk nodded, taking the flash drive from Diesel. We'll head to the safe house first. Once we're clear, we'll make our move. The crew was ready. They had faced down danger, uncovered the truth, and now it was time to expose it all. But Hawk knew this wasn't the end. They had taken out the foot soldiers, but the real battle was still to come. The people at the top of the pyramid, the ones who had been hiding behind the scenes, were still out there, and they weren't going to go down without a fight. As they mounted their bikes and revved the engines, Hawk's mind raced. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let up. Not until every last one of them was held accountable. As they sped off into the night, Hawk could feel the weight of the mission settling heavily on his shoulders. He glanced back at Aisha and Jamal, who were riding behind Diesel, their faces hidden behind the helmets, but their presence a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. The safe house wasn't far, but it felt like an eternity as they rode, the wind whipping past them and the roar of the engines filling the air. Hawk's thoughts were focused on what lay ahead. They had to move fast. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As they reached the safe house, Hawk signaled for everyone to slow down. The house was hidden in the woods, far from prying eyes, and it had served them well before. It was the perfect place to lay low and regroup. They parked their bikes in the yard, keeping them out of sight, and made their way inside. The safe house was small, but it had everything they needed: a place to rest, secure communication, and most importantly, privacy. Hawk closed the door behind them and turned to Diesel. Let's get the files uploaded, he said. We need to get this out to the press before they can bury it. Diesel nodded, heading toward the small desk in the corner of the room. As Diesel worked on securing the files, Hawk sat down, running his fingers through his hair. He needed a plan. They had the evidence, but they couldn't just send it off into the wind. It had to be handled carefully. One wrong move, and they would lose everything. What's the word on the authorities? Hawk asked Forge, who had been scanning the room. I've got a contact, Forge said, his voice low. Someone who can help us get this to the right place without it disappearing into the system. But we need to make sure we trust them. Hawk looked at him, his mind racing. We can't afford to take risks. We've already been through too much. I know, Forge replied. But we don't have much time. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to get the truth out. Hawk nodded, understanding the urgency. All right, get the contact ready. We'll move on this as soon as the files are sent out. As Diesel finished securing the files, he turned to Hawk. It's done, he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. Hawk's heart pounded as he stood up. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for was finally here. They were about to expose the truth to the world. But Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't done yet. The final confrontation was still to come. They had to stay vigilant. As the crew gathered around, ready to take the next step, Hawk felt the weight of the mission settling over him. This wasn't just about taking down a few criminals. This was about exposing a system of corruption that had been in place for far too long. They were going to bring it all down, no matter what it took. The safe house was still, the air heavy with the realization of how close they were to finishing what they had started. Hawk stood by the window, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky a deep orange, but inside the small, quiet cabin, the crew was busy preparing for the next step. The files had been uploaded, the evidence was in the right hands, and now all they had to do was wait for the fallout. But Hawk knew better than to relax just yet. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. As he turned away from the window, Diesel was seated at the table, his fingers flying over his phone as he contacted their ally in the media, ready to coordinate the release. Forge was still at the door, eyes sharp, his gaze scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Bear and Shadow were nearby, always alert, their bodies tense, ready for whatever came next. Hawk didn't speak for a moment, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. They had a lead on the next steps, but everything hinged on how the authorities responded, and that was something they couldn't control. The last thing they needed was to get caught in a trap before they could expose the full extent of the corruption. Hawk walked over to Diesel, his voice steady but filled with urgency. How's it looking? Diesel looked up, his expression grim but determined. It's in motion. I've got a few contacts on the inside who'll make sure this hits the right channels. But there's a problem. We're not the only ones watching the authorities. Hawk's gut tightened. What do you mean? Diesel leaned forward, his fingers drumming on the table. There's a leak. I've been getting reports from my sources that some of the people we've been targeting have already begun moving, trying to cover their tracks. Someone tipped them off. Hawk's mind raced. Who? Diesel shrugged. I don't know yet. But if they catch wind of what we're doing, we'll be fighting an uphill battle. Hawk turned to Forge. We need to move fast. If they're making moves, we can't wait for the press to expose them. We have to go after them now. Forge nodded, his jaw tight with determination. We've got eyes on the streets. We'll know if anything changes. Hawk looked over at the rest of the crew, his gaze meeting theirs. It's time. We can't sit here waiting. We're going after them, whoever's pulling the strings. This ends today. The crew gathered their gear and made their way outside, the weight of the mission heavy on their shoulders. Hawk mounted his bike, feeling the familiar roar of the engine beneath him. They couldn't waste any more time. As they rode through the streets, Hawk's thoughts raced ahead, calculating their every move. They weren't just going to take down a few corrupt individuals. They were going to bring down the entire network, the ones who had been exploiting and destroying lives for far too long. As they reached the city limits, Hawk signaled for them to stop. They parked their bikes in a small, quiet area behind an abandoned building, their surroundings perfect for an ambush. The city stretched out before them, but Hawk wasn't interested in the city's skyline. He was focused on the operation ahead. This is it, Hawk said, his voice low. We make our move now. Forge, Bear, you're with me. Diesel, Shadow, cover the exits. We hit them hard and fast. The crew nodded in unison, their faces set with resolve. Hawk turned to Diesel. Keep the comms open. If anything goes wrong, we need to know immediately. Diesel gave a sharp nod, tapping his earpiece. Got it. We'll be ready. They moved swiftly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the building where they knew the final meeting was taking place. The operation was moving faster than Hawk expected, but the urgency of the moment only sharpened his focus. They had the element of surprise, but it wouldn't last long. They were about to hit the very heart of the operation, and everything depended on timing. As they reached the door, Hawk motioned for Bear and Forge to flank either side. The door creaked slightly as Hawk pushed it open, his heart racing as he stepped into the dimly lit room. Inside, several men sat around a table, speaking in hushed tones, unaware of the approaching threat. Hawk's eyes locked on their leader, a tall, well-dressed man who sat at the head of the table. His eyes were cold, calculating, as if he already knew who was coming for him. The room froze as Hawk and his crew stepped inside, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The man at the table smirked, his hands clasped in front of him. "I knew you'd come," he said calmly, his voice smooth and collected. Hawk's hand tightened around his gun. "You've been running this operation for far too long," he said, his voice low and steady. "But it ends now." The man chuckled, clearly unfazed. "You think you can stop us? This goes much deeper than you think. You're just a distraction, a small thorn in our side." Hawk's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "You're wrong. This ends. Today. You're going down." With a quick signal, Forge and Bear moved to block the exits, while Hawk advanced toward the table. As the standoff continued, the man stood up slowly, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Hawk. You don't even realize what you're up against." Hawk stepped closer, his voice unwavering. "I know exactly what I'm up against, and I'm not backing down." The man paused for a moment, then signaled to the men around the table. The room erupted into chaos as the Iron Riders launched into action, taking down the guards one by one. Hawk's heart pounded as he moved toward the leader, his resolve stronger than ever. The fight wasn't over, but the end was finally in sight. The warehouse was filled with the sounds of chaos, gunfire, and shouting. Hawk moved with precision, his mind clear despite the noise. The last few minutes had been a blur, gunshots ringing out, bodies hitting the floor, and the realization that the man sitting at the head of the table had finally been taken down. The leader's cold smirk had disappeared the moment he realized they weren't backing down. Hawk's heart was still pounding, but his focus never wavered. As he approached the leader's now lifeless body, he heard Diesel's voice crackling through the comms. "We've got the files. It's done." That was the moment Hawk had been waiting for, the moment they had fought for. "Get out," Hawk commanded. "We're done here." The crew began to move, carefully scanning the area for any remaining threats. But Hawk knew the real battle wasn't won by bullets. It was won by the truth, and now they had it. As the last of the men who had been working with the leader were taken into custody, Hawk turned to Forge, who had been keeping watch near the exits. "Is the way clear?" he asked. Forge nodded. "No sign of reinforcements. We've got the place locked down." "Good," Hawk said, his voice filled with both relief and resolve. "Now, we get the truth out there." The crew gathered around the files Diesel had secured, carefully sorting through the evidence. Diesel was already on the phone, contacting his media contacts, making sure the story would break in the right hands. "Everything's in motion," Diesel confirmed, looking up from his phone. "The press will have everything they need. This is going to shake things up." Hawk couldn't help but let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had done it. The corruption, the lies, and the people who thought they could hide in the shadows were now exposed. Hawk looked over at Aisha and Jamal, who were sitting quietly off to the side. Aisha had her arms wrapped around her brother, her face filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She looked up at Hawk, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "We're safe now, thanks to you." Hawk smiled, his gaze softening. "You don't have to thank me. This was always about protecting you too." Aisha nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, but her smile was wide and genuine. Jamal, who had been silent up until now, looked up at Hawk. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small but filled with hope. Hawk thought for a moment before answering. "Now, we make sure the truth is heard. We make sure no one gets away with what they've done." Diesel's voice interrupted their moment of quiet reflection. "We've got incoming calls from the press. Looks like the story's already getting traction." Hawk nodded, his focus sharpening once more. "Good. Let's make sure we're ready." They had come this far, and now they had to see it through to the end. The Iron Riders were more than just a group of bikers. They were a force for justice, and they would keep fighting until the truth was fully revealed. As the crew prepared to head out, Hawk's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen and saw a message from one of his contacts. It was a simple sentence, but it sent a chill through his spine. "They're already making their move. Stay alert." Hawk felt the weight of that message sink in. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had exposed the truth, but the people behind all of this weren't going to roll over that easily. "We need to get moving," Hawk said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The battle's not over." We've got to stay one step ahead. As they loaded their bikes and prepared to leave the cabin, Hawk couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his crew. They had fought hard, stayed true to their mission, and had brought the truth into the light. But Hawk knew that the real fight was just beginning. They couldn't rest until the last of the corrupt were brought to justice. "Let's ride," Hawk said, his voice steady and filled with purpose. The Iron Riders revved their engines, the sound of their bikes roaring into the early morning. Hawk led the way, his eyes focused on the road ahead. There would be more challenges to come, more enemies to face, but Hawk knew they were ready. The Iron Riders would fight until the end, and they wouldn't stop until the job was done. As they sped down the open road, Hawk's mind was filled with one thought. The truth was out, and they were the ones who had brought it to light. Nothing could stop them now,